It's the Happy Families Podcast. It's the podcast for the time-poor parent who just wants answers now.
Kylie, for the first, let's say 20 years of our marriage, it was always just family holidays. You, me, the kids. We said, in fact, we were explicit about this. We would watch people who would go on holidays solo and say, why would they do that? How could they leave each other? Imagine going on a holiday on your own.
I think part of the reason we felt that way, though, was because we'd actually never experienced a real holiday.
Well, that's true.
All of our holidays were sleeping in family lounge rooms.
We go to your parents' place or my parents' place. We didn't have holidays for like the first, 15, 18 years of our marriage, really. We didn't have the money for it. But over time, of course, we've been able to start to have some holidays. And maybe 5 years ago, you started to have some girls' trips. Or you'd either go solo and do your own thing, or you would go on a girls' trip away. And so in today's podcast, what we thought we'd do, and this is partly inspired by our experience, but also partly inspired by an article that I stumbled across recently, looking at the idea of girls' trips, thought we'd talk about the good, the bad, the ugly, whether it's a good idea or not to go on holiday with a bunch of girls or a bunch of guys and leave your husband or wife or partner at home to hold on to the home front and manage the kids and keep everything going on their own while you go and party. Good idea, bad idea. Where do we land on this? In this article, it's very much about saying girls need to get away and have their trips at every age. And I love this. The questions that this author gets in order of frequency are, number one, how are you affording this? And in brackets, she says, by saving. How are you managing this with work? And this particular author says, I'm self-employed, but most of my friends have to juggle annual leave with a month that has a whole lot of public holidays in it or something like that. And then the third question is, don't your partners mind? And the big answer here was, no, they don't. So I want to talk about this idea of how do you make it happen? Should you make it happen? Does it work? Doesn't it work? If it's going to work, what do you need to be mindful of? So much rich material for us to dive into. Where do you want to start?
Well, I think there's a really big difference between girls' trips and boys' trips.
Yeah, yes.
And the way they're perceived. So maybe start there. Okay,
so I'm going to say this. I get nervous about girls' trips, and maybe I shouldn't say this. I might get cancelled for saying this, but I get worried about girls' trips because when a whole bunch of girls get together, especially if there's any unhappiness and misery in some of those relationships, I become really nervous that you might go away and then come back and end up bearing the load of relationship drama. Like, it's contagious. And I would hate for you to go away and have all the emotional baggage and burden. And yet at the same time, the emotional intensity, girls' trips, I suppose when girls get together, there's deep conversations and there's emotional bonding and that kind of thing. So I want to tread carefully when I say this. Can you say this more delicately than me so that I don't sound like I'm just being a grumpy guy around this one?
So I think the people that you spend time with is so important. There's that idea out there that the 5 people you spend the most time with is kind of the person you become.
Yeah, you become the average of those 5 people.
Yeah, and so I remember in the early days when you and I first got married and we had our first child and I was attending mums groups. And I would go along and I would sit in a room full of disgruntled women who were really unhappy with their partners and would spend the whole hour and a half we were together while we were supposed to enjoy each other's time just bashing their husbands. And I would come home feeling just a little bit bewildered by it because I wasn't having those experiences.
I remember those conversations. You'd come home and say, they don't like the father of their children. Like, this is a pretty serious issue here.
And that early on, like you think about new relationships, often you're in that honeymoon state, right? So everything's beautiful and golden and rich. And so for me, the most important thing about any kind of trip, like extended trip that you're going to spend time with, you want to actually be with people that elevate you, that
choose your companions carefully is what you're saying.
Yeah. And I think that is such an important part of the process.
I was thinking about it as well. And this is probably for both girls and guys, but I'll say it in the girls' trip, just the challenge of crawling underneath the barbed wire, of finding the time, the annual leave if you're an employee, or trying to work out how you're going to do that. I guess there's a second element to this that's very much about the girls. And that is just dancing through the minefield of kids and your husband or partner and their expectations and potential whinging and whining about strategic incompetence. I don't know how to do it. I don't know where the kids have to be on which day, and I don't think that I can cook the meals and all that. I mean, that's something when we've talked about this on social media, that's something that comes up all the time. I could never do that. I could never leave my husband to look after the kids for a week or 4 days while I go away with the girls.
I've had so many conversations since I took my first solo trip, nearly 5 years ago now, and I'm really mindful that doing it is hard for lots of different reasons.
And it's hard for you because you're going away and trusting, and it's then hard for dad or partner who's at home doing it all.
100%. And the reason I went on my very first trip wasn't about going on a holiday. I was so burnt out and I needed the space because I knew my life and where I was mentally, emotionally, and physically was not where I wanted to be.
And can I just say 2 things about this? Number 1, I actively encouraged you to go. And number 2, I nailed it while you were gone. It was amazing. I was like, yes, I've got it.
But this is the thing. It was a joint decision. I didn't put my foot down and say, I'm doing this regardless of what you think. I've got to go. I didn't say I have to be gone for this amount of time. We sat together in this place and recognized that I was in a hard place and I just needed a little bit of breathing space so I could actually see my reality for what it was and not for what I felt like it was in that place where I felt like the blinders were so heavy that I could only see the tip of my nose.
So note to dads, you've got to deal with just the logistics, okay? And there's obviously the financial elements, and there's clearly going to be a major shift in the dynamic while your wife or partner is away. But I just think if you're in a situation where you can save up and set this as a goal, I know how good it is when you come home. You feel like a different person. You feel so refreshed and so good about life. And we're also thrilled to have you home. I mean, it's just a wonderful reunion. I would encourage dads to actively pursue this as a, hey, hun, go on a girls' trip or go and have a solo trip and go somewhere and isolate yourself and spend a couple of days relaxing and pulling it together so that we can be strong again for the next little while. I just reckon there's so much value in it, and I think mums need to be encouraged, actively encouraged to go and do it.
I was having a conversation with a really good friend of mine and she is so burnt out. She is so stretched. And I said, you need a couple of days away, wherever it is. It doesn't have to be an expensive getaway. Just go and do this for yourself. And she just looked at me and she said, I couldn't do it. She said, there's just so many moving parts in our house. She said, my kids are all at different stages. I'd be scared that someone would get hurt and I wasn't here to fix it. I don't even think my husband would know where to find the Band-Aids if he needed them, that kind of thing. And I think for so many of us, we become martyrs to the life that we've chosen. We've chosen it.
I know the couple you're talking about. And the thing I know about them is that he would be fine.
100%.
He would be thrilled for the opportunity.
And friends would step in and extended family would step in if it was needed. Like, we don't have to be martyrs to the experiences that we're having, but so many of us choose to be because we can't fathom that somebody else will come along and do things differently. And that's what it comes down to. Your husband will do things differently to you, and it is not necessarily going to look pretty, and it's not necessarily going to be what you want. But are your children safe? Are your children going to be okay? Are your children going to enjoy the novelty of doing things differently? Possibly. And you're all going to be better off for it at the other end because you come home refreshed, rejuvenated, and ready to jump back into life again. And your kids will either appreciate you more than they've ever appreciated you before because dad totally messed it up, or be grateful to have you back because they've missed your presence.
Yeah. Okay, up next, we need to talk about boys' trips.
So I've had a lot to say about girls' trips because obviously I have now experienced them. But we're going to talk about boys' trips. And what's interesting about this is you've actually never done one.
No.
And we've had conversations about this because you have seen the benefits that have come from me having a little bit of time away. And you made a decision last year that you were going to go on a surfing trip with the boys.
That's right. I decided to book a surfing trip. I decided to book a boys' trip. And then
you decided to invite me.
I'm not sure that I decided to invite you so much as I told you where I was going and it was a bucket list destination and you said, oh, and then you looked at me with those eyes.
You can't put this one on me.
You looked at me with those eyes and said, I've always wanted to go there. That's what you said.
I did say that,
Yeah.
but I think it had more to do with the fact that you didn't want to go to bed on your own each night.
I travel so much. I spent so much time in hotels and I didn't want to be on my own. And apart from that, only one of the guys said, yeah, I'm in. All the other guys said no.
You didn't want to have a bromance?
Not at all. So as I've talked to other guys and listened to the conversations that happen, I just want to highlight that when it comes to boys' trips, there are a few points of friction. There are a few unique obstacles that relate to boys' trips. Boys don't, or men, husbands, whatever, don't have the same, I guess, headache in terms of, are you going to be all right, honey, if I leave for a few days?
Yeah.
That seems to be a girl's thing. It seems to be a women thing.
And I have, again, as we've gone throughout married life together, the conversations I have with my friends whose husbands have had this boys' trip that they do every year.
Right, the golf trip or the fishing trip or the surfing trip or the cycling trip or whatever.
Becomes a place of resentment in their relationship because the wife never does it, either from her own decision that it couldn't possibly work, I can't possibly do it, as in the case that we've just shared, or her husband never thinks to encourage her to do it. It's not even a conversation piece. It's just accepted that I go off and do it, but you have to stay home and look after the kids because I couldn't possibly do your job.
So my boys' trip that you're coming along on is only a few weeks away, and I'm so excited for it. I'm really, really looking forward to it.
So am I, because while you're surfing, I'm going to sit in the massage table and get a good massage and read a book by the poolside.
We're having a joint boys and girls trip. That's what we're doing.
Well, thankfully, your mate's bringing his wife too, so we will.
Yeah. So the concerns that I see, the things that I see coming up are first off, often boys' trips are associated with heavy drinking and rowdy behaviour, just boys being boys. I don't like that phrase, but I think that it says everything. And there's also, and I really hate to say this, but I've heard too many stories of potential infidelity or that kind of thing. I don't know. Boys' trips can absolutely trigger anxieties in partners about the excessive partying and the temptations. Now, I know that plenty of girls go away and have lots of fun as well, but it seems like it's more likely to be associated with boys' trips. And there's also associated communication challenges. That's another thing that seems to come up a lot. Men seem to be less inclined to talk about what happened on their trip. It's that whole what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that can lead partners to have mistrust and suspicion and feel excluded. And I just think it's not okay. I've also I heard one person indicate that when their hubby came home from his trips, he's a bit grumpy for a bit. Like, instead of coming home refreshed and relaxed, he comes back and he's like, ugh. And there's friction, like, oh, the kids, and oh, I've just had all this me time and now I'm back into this rubbish. And there's almost like a lack of gratitude for the time away. It's more of a, geez, I wish my life was like that all the time kind of thing.
And I don't think that's gender related. I think that
you're probably right.
Yeah.
So these are the challenges associated with it. Overall, though, I mean, I can't speak from experience. I'm looking forward to speaking from experience. But
you're gonna have to wait another year.
But when I do talk to my friends who have had those trips, they relish them, they cherish them, they really look forward to them. One of my mates, he just saves up his money and flies into Melbourne and goes to the wave pool there, and he spends 4 or 5 days at the wave pool, way cheaper than going away on a big holiday somewhere, and absolutely has a ball. And for him, that's his annual boys trip, him and a couple of mates. I'm thinking about joining him, except I can't see the joy in sitting in a wave pool compared to going somewhere a bit more exotic or tropical, or even Coffs Harbour. I'll take Coffs. Do you know what I mean? Okay, so we need to wrap this up. The boys' trips, the girls' trips, there are some challenges around it. How do we overcome those common obstacles and points of friction?
So I've got 3 things.
Go.
I think the people that you spend time with matters.
Yep.
And spouses are going to be generally more supportive if they feel comfortable with the people that you're spending time with. If they know that you've got good friends who are great examples and uplift and live, good morals, then the chances of your partner or spouse going AWOL in that situation is pretty limited.
Yeah.
And the second thing would be that intention behind your time away matters.
Yeah, what's the purpose? Am I going away to party, or am I going away because I want to ride my bike up big hills or catch lots of waves?
Yeah, I just need a break from the mental load. I need to, rejuvenate, restore, all of those things.
Yeah, or have lots of massages at a health retreat.
Of course.
Yeah, sorry, I was thinking about me. I'm so sorry. You said 3 things.
And lastly, communication. Communication is so important. If your husband or partner has been having these men's trips for years on end and you haven't, then it's about time that we sit down and just acknowledge, I love that you get to go and do this, but I'm at a point in my life where I'm actually starting to resent it because I feel like I really need it. How can we make this work?
Yeah, my summary point was just one. It was basically the success of any trip, regardless of whether you're a boy or a girl, male or female, hinges on having a healthy and trusting relationship. If your relationship's not a good place, this is probably going to sow the seeds of resentment and suspicion. But if you've got open communication, mutual respect, and a willingness to work together to make it work for one another, then everyone's going to feel comfortable. Everyone's going to feel supported, and these can be really enriching individual experiences, but also ultimately be good for the relationship.
And I think the only other thing I want to say, because so many people just feel like they just want to put their husbands in the deep end and let them kind of suffer through that experience.
You're right.
The chances of this being a annual experience, if that's how you kind of view things, is going to be probably very short-lived if we don't put some contingencies in place for them. The reality is they don't do our job every day. And so while we don't need to mother them, we don't need to baby them, we don't need to, fill in every gap, here's a list of people that you can send the kids to for an hour for a play. Or here's a couple of freezer meals to get you through. You'll be able to do 4 meals on your own or whatever. But just making a little bit of effort to help them know that they're not on their own, because anyone who's been on their own knows the weight of that.
The Happy Families podcast is produced by Justin Rulon from Bridge Media. We hope it's given you some inspiration, some ideas, maybe sparks a conversation, even if it only happens once every 2 or 3 years. I think there's value in it. If you'd like more information about making your family happier, we'd love for you to join us at happyfamilies.com.au. Check out our Happy Families membership. So many people are involved and making their families thrive as a result. happyfamilies.com.au. We'll see you on the podcast tomorrow.